friends. Welcome to another episode of the Mystery Bible on podcast. We're very excited for this episode. You have myself, Joel, and then, of course, Dan and Brian rounding out your fearless trifecta. And today, we are very pleased to be bringing you an exciting interview that we've been really looking forward to with author Karin Wilkinson. We're going to be discussing Karin Wilkinson's book called Stolen Seed, Evil Harvest. And we highly recommend that you get this book because she brings a thoughtful biblical perspective to this very difficult topic, specifically around abductions. I'm going to say up front, for those of you who like to listen to our podcast in carpool or these sorts of things, this is probably not a good episode for small children unless you want to be having a lot of awkward conversations that you might not be prepared for. We want Ms. Wilkinson to be able to speak bluntly and frankly about this difficult topic. As you know, we think that this topic is a little bit underexposed given the importance of it, and we want to be able to bring it no holds barred to you, our audience, in a thoughtful, respectful way. Ms. Karin Wilkinson has faced lifelong issues in the abduction space, and as a believer in Christ, then she has a really helpful perspective on these issues. So I don't want to give away too much about her story or her perspectives, but I do want to give that disclaimer up front. This is a adults-only episode. Ms. Wilkinson, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you being here.
Well, thank you so much, Joel and Dan and Brian. I'm just so happy to be here with you guys today and such an amazing group of men. Thank you.
And I know you are good, close friends with Miss Vicki Joy Anderson, who we interviewed recently, and she was kind enough to make the introduction to you. So we, of course, thank Miss Vicki Joy Anderson for that introduction. And if you haven't heard that episode on sleep paralysis, we highly recommend it, and you can get her book as well. Karin, there are a lot of directions that we can go with this conversation, and I'm sure there are hours and hours of things we could discuss. But what I want to get to is kind of framing this conversation from the perspective of people who maybe don't fully appreciate what the abduction phenomena is and what it's about. As we've discussed briefly, our audience, we've talked about demonic forces and Nephilim and all kinds of things. So that our audience has a good foundational background for the kinds of things you're saying. But I also know that this is a little bit of an ontological challenge for people who just haven't thought about these things a lot. And as you know, UAPs and UFOs and those sorts of things are very much in the news these days. We've talked a little bit about that in terms of David Grush and current events, and we've tried to bring our audience up to speed on the conversation, but this space is moving really rapidly. What I'm hoping you can do is tell your story. So this is not just a he said, she said, or somebody I know, or I read on Reddit somewhere. That stuff is a lot less helpful than talking to somebody who's really experienced lifelong challenges and issues with this very difficult phenomena. So I want to give you a moment to just kind of give the overview, the introduction of why you're an authority in this space. And if you want to talk about what led you to write the book, you're welcome to. And then I'm hoping, if you don't mind, we can bring some pretty specific questions around helping people understand the specific reality of this and what you've experienced, that it's not some weird ethereal dream thing that's happening in somebody's head somewhere, that it's real, it's physical, it's affecting people, it's happening on a large scale, and you have some really powerful conclusions in terms of what this could mean for us, not only as a species, but also as Christians. And that's the most important thing. We'll always bring it back to Christ and the gospel at the end and the victory we have in Christ. So that's my rambling way of framing the conversation and hopefully giving you some thoughts. But let me hand the mic over to you, Ms. Wilkinson, to just talk about why this topic and the broad strokes of why you're somebody to write this book and what you're hoping to accomplish.
Sure. Yeah, that's a lot. And I could talk about that for hours just from that one intro question there. Yes, thank you so much. I am a lifelong abductee. I have been taken since as young as I can remember by non-human entities. And that's what makes me an authority in this subject, because I've experienced it firsthand for my entire life. And there are a lot of people out there talking about UFOs, aliens, abductions, a lot of different directions that it's going in, where people are making a lot of assumptions, people talking about things without having experienced them. There are experiencers talking about this in all different areas, but there aren't a lot of people speaking about this from a Christian perspective. And for me, that was something that was very important to me, was to share what's happened to me, how I was able to stop it, let people know they're not alone, and make it okay to have these conversations and talk about these very real things that are happening to very real people, many, many people all over the world. And so I didn't expect to write this book. God really put it on my heart to write this book. He gave me my marching orders, and I, I really didn't feel like I had a choice. I really followed God's path for me on this. And it's interesting that everything now is coming out the way it is in the world. But I think that the process was really interesting, because I'll kind of talk a little bit about how I came to write the book, and then I'll back up a little bit and go into kind of typically what was happening to me throughout my life, if that's okay, if that sounds good. Okay, so I went through. I was a born again Christian when I was in my late teens, and like so many, I fell away from my faith, and found my way back to that maybe 8 years ago or so. Finally, and I hadn't really left God, and I hadn't really left my faith, but I wasn't walking and living my faith. And I really got into New Age and different things like that. And then I went in for a surgery, and I had a near-death experience. I died on an operating table. And it was a horrific experience up to the point that I heard an audible voice tell me it was okay, I could let go, and I left my body and experienced peace and love beyond anything you can imagine in this world. We don't have words for it. There's no way to describe what I experienced, the love, the peace, everything. And I won't go into that experience right now. We can certainly talk about that later. But
And
after that,
just for reference, we have done an episode specifically on near-death experiences and Imagine Heaven with Dr. Burke. So
okay.
our audience should be somewhat familiar with that. And so that's a very interesting connection point that you have there, that was a life-changing experience for you.
It really was. It really was. God was my Father, my Creator, my Heavenly Father. God was there with me and for me, and took me away from the pain and brought me out of that, and held me in his arms until it was time for me to go back into my body. And I just experienced love and peace like there's nothing, we can't even describe it. There's nothing that describes it. And it's overwhelming. Nothing else comes into that space. It is just completely all encompassing. And I know that's just a little tiny glimpse of what we have to come. So I can't imagine, when I think about it, I start to cry because I got to experience something so amazing and beautiful. But the process leading up to it was quite traumatic. And after that, I did have to go through some PTSD therapy. And that therapy allowed me to learn how to deal with the trauma associated with this lifelong abduction experiences that I had had. And I remembered these experiences. I didn't do hypnotherapy or anything like that. I just always had these memories. And I don't remember everything, and I don't remember all of them, but I remember quite a bit. And I'm not alone in that. I've talked to so many people who are exactly the same. There's this kind of misconception that you have to go through hypnosis and all these crazy things to remember anything, and that everyone's memories are wiped. And that's just not true. It's true in some cases, and it's true in some instances of abduction for all of us, but not every one of them, and not for all of us.
Can I ask a quick question, Karin?
Sure.
So you went into the hospital for a near, like you almost, like you said, you died on the operating table.
Mm-hmm.
Was that in any way related to any of the abduction, or it just happened to be kind of a turning point with you and helped you with some of the therapeutic ability to deal with some of the trauma?
Yeah. That there's a couple of things there. It seemed almost as if, and this is conjecture on my part, as if a hit was put out on me because somebody knew the direction I was going to be going. Because it was just all too strange how it happened and who did it and the ways that it happened. When I was waiting for surgery, I had 2 IV ports in, but I wasn't hooked up to machines. It wasn't my first surgery. It wasn't my first rodeo in there. And so I was already in the operating room, but my surgeon came out. He wasn't quite ready. So he went back to, they were putting a bunch of wires and rods and plates and things in my spine. And so the nurses were putzing around, and I was just lying there, not hooked up to any machines. And a anesthesiologist came in. She leaned over me. She had a pocket full of syringes, pulled one out, put it in my arm. I assumed it was a just, something to calm me down. Just, it was a paralytic, and she walked away, and I was alone, and I died. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I couldn't motion for help. Nothing. It was like drowning without being in water. It was horrifying.
That must have been, just given your past, that must have been so associated with sleep paralysis kind of states.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, this is happening in a operating table as opposed to, and of course, not being able to breathe is even worse. So no wonder that was a triggering, and I know that word gets overused, but in your case, it's very appropriate. That was a triggering event for you.
Yes, exactly. It was, because it tied into so many things that had happened, being restrained against my will. And then on top of that, not being able to breathe, not being able to call for help. My whole life as this little child was not being able to call for help. No one to help me. I was helpless my whole life. And then to have this happen later in life as an adult, an older adult, it was beyond terror. But, the funny thing, God gives you beauty for ashes. It became something that PTSD therapy helped me to be able to deal with this lifelong abduction experiences and utilize them for good instead of just being terrified all the time. And so God put it on my heart that I had to share now that I could deal with it. And, in my prayer, I'm like, God, who am I supposed to share this with? Who's going to listen to me? Who's going to believe me? And God said, I will show you. The next thing, L.A. Marzulli pops up on my screen. I start watching that going, okay. I reached out to him. Within a month, he had my interview. I don't even know how it all happened. It's all God. And that became the center point for his 4th movie in the UFO series. I was terrified because I'd never told my story to anyone except my husband. I didn't know what was going to happen. I just, this is not a subject people talk about without being called crazy. And especially, but I wanted to let people know, hey, I was able to stop this. Because as my faith was renewed, I realized, they have the same creator I have. I can call on my creator. I can call on God. I can call on Jesus, knowing in my heart that he has all authority, and they know that I know, and they just stopped in their tracks. They understood that. Whether I said it verbally, whether I thought it, whether, however I got it out there, they couldn't hurt me anymore. I was able to break those bonds. And this goes back to some of the things in Vicki Joy Anderson's book that she addresses, that you have to break those covenants and break those things that have happened that have put you with those entities. I didn't make those covenants. They were made for me. And some of them I did and some of them I didn't. But so anyway, back on to how it happened. So after that movie came out, I was
I just want to pull some threads together so that the audience is following, because I'm following what you're saying, but you're bringing in a lot of different elements that people may have not connected before. And I think it's important that they do. So what you just explained to us is you have had a lifelong reality of abduction experiences with non-human entities. And we'll talk more specifically about what that means in a moment. And that lifelong reality means, just for clarification, not this happened once when you were a kid, and then again later. It was an ongoing, regular pattern of what we call abductions. And for those of you who haven't listened to our alien abduction episode, might be helpful to have that framework. But we're talking about what is commonly called alien abductions. Arguably on exactly what that means, but we'll set that aside for now. So then, in a routine surgery, you had a near-death experience that was so traumatizing because it triggered some terrible memories. And by the way, you have conscious memories, real firsthand conscious memories of these alien abduction scenarios. And in your follow-up therapy, because of that medical experience you had, then it brought you to a point of enough peace and a realization from the Lord that you needed to share this, because it sounds like what you're saying is there's a spiritual reality here. And that spiritual reality is something that a lot of people would disagree with or would argue with. But I'm going to speak for all of us and say we don't. I think that we agree with you that there's a spiritual reality here when it comes to these non-human entities and their interaction with humanity. And then you briefly referenced these permissions. And the reason why that's important, we've done some episodes on demonic possession and these sorts of things. And alien abduction and demonic possession are not the same thing. But there are legal implications in the spirit world for both of those. And so I'm just clarifying for the audience that when you are saying that, you're not saying that anybody who's had any spiritual attack is also an abductee. That's not necessarily the same thing, but sometimes those events can go hand in hand, and I'm sure that we'll get to it. But nobody knows exactly why certain people experience a lot of abduction events. There's some spiritual permission, most certainly in some cases, and certainly in your case. There's probably some biological factors and maybe some consciousness factors, and it's really hard to know exactly why some people experience this and other people don't, and then in the subset of those who experience it, why some of them remember it and other people don't, and why some of them have what they think are positive experiences, and then other people have profoundly negative experiences, and everywhere in between. So I'm just saying all that to make sure people understand we're not trying to make definitive statements of this is what it is and this is what everybody's reality is and this is happening to you. That's not at all what we're saying. We're Karin's telling her story and pointing out that there is a spiritual connection. And for her, it came to the surface with a near-death experience. And she's describing some very difficult memories. And what we're hoping to do is learn from her and her experiences on her perspective of what this means in terms of a spiritual reality and a physical reality. You'll hear on our podcast, we are frequently repeating the fact that spiritual and physical are not separate antithetical things. There's a literal spiritual reality is also a literal physical reality. Sometimes they overlap 100%, and sometimes they overlap a little less than 100%. But and I'm sure you would agree with this, the near-death experience you had was in many ways more real, not less real than what a lot of us colloquially refer to as reality. So I know that was a little bit of an interruption, but I just wanted to put that umbrella over the conversation because you said so many things that pull together so many. And I think that's really important to recognize that these phenomena, and when I say these, I mean everything from demonic possession to abduction to near-death experiences to out-of-body experiences to just walking in faith on a day-to-day basis, that these things, the more you look into them, or as Brian Bunnyman Brown would say, the more you go down the rabbit hole, the more you find that they overlap. They're not separate phenomena. There's something about them. And there are many researchers who have come to this conclusion, and it's not the popular secular narrative that these things are related. There is something spiritual when it comes to the non-human entities, the unmanned aerial phenomena, the unidentified flying objects, whatever term you want to use. There's something spiritual to it, and it's not as friendly as many would have it seem. Now, that doesn't mean that they're all unfriendly, because there are also non-human entities that are angels, and there are things like that as well. So we're not trying to oversimplify, but we're also trying to explain that this is a wide, complex spectrum, and it has everything to do with the spiritual realities with which we wrestle, and that Scripture says we wrestle with on a day-to-day basis.
Yes, absolutely. I agree. And what I'm doing now is just kind of giving a really high level overview of how this actually came to be. And as far as the specifics of it, then we can go back and dig into the specifics. But for how I believe and my thought processes on this is, yes, this is a part of a spiritual battle that's been going on since the Garden of Eden. This is a part of the seed war that's been going on since Genesis 6. And in Genesis 3, when he said, your seed will be at enmity with the seed of the woman, and he will crush your head and you will bruise his heel, or he will bruise his heel and you will crush his head. This is all a part, everything in my book, and when I write, and whoever, thank you, has the opportunity to read the book, I bring everything back to a biblical perspective and show the reader where it can be found in our Bible, or most things in our Bible, and in that way, showing that this is not some new reality that has just come out of nowhere. And these are entities that came out from Zeta Reticuli and decided to start visiting our planet. These are entities that have been around from long before us. These are angelic entities, some fallen, that we have been dealing with since the Garden, and we are still dealing with. You may change what they're called. You may decide to say they come from here or there or another place, but we're still dealing with spiritual wickedness in high places. We are still dealing with entities that were here before us, that God created. They are his creations, and they are fallen. And they are still attacking God's people, just like they've been since the beginning. And we do have protection over that. And we do need to understand where we are in that, and that our faith is a very important part of protecting ourselves.
Thank you for helping clarify that for our audience, and also, audience, we're not saying that all non-human entities are strictly demonic or of the strictly same. It's all over the place. They're fallen angels and Nephilim and demons. There are lines between these things, life and death lines, and embodied and disembodied, and all sorts of things. So we're not trying to paint with too broad a brush here. Karin, for and I'm sorry, I know we interrupt from time to time, but otherwise we'll be here for 4 hours, which I'd love to, but I'm sure you wouldn't love it. For those people who have very little background in this, could you, I know we kind of know what we're talking about when I say we, I mean this group on the recording right now, we have an idea of what we mean when we say an alien abduction scenario, but there are many people who don't. What is that, and what does that look like for you? And just maybe kind of walk through a scenario, and I'll ask a few clarifying questions along the way, and I'm sure Brian has some things as well. And just give an example of what you were dealing with on a regular basis, the kind of frequency, what it was like, and what things you were seeing and doing. And again, we recognize that this is not the same as everybody's experience, but I've heard enough of your discussion and from what I've seen of your book, it's not that different from a lot of people's experience either. So I think it's a really helpful case study.
Yeah, no, it's not. I've spoken to so many people. I probably meet a new person every day, online or in one way or another. Someone reaches out to me who's had a similar experience to mine, that the only difference is it's them versus me in this scenario. But I'll go back to like when I was little, a typical abduction scenario when I would be very young, and it started, and it was pretty much the same throughout my life. The first thing, almost always, it would happen at night, in the middle of the night. I would wake up and just feel a change in the room. I could feel just a presence, an evil presence. It was palpable. It's like when, it's like if you walk up on a rattlesnake, or you're about to get hit by a bus or something like that. You think you see a car wreck happening. It's that kind of crazy, oh my gosh, here it comes feeling. Quite often, if I was in the country at my grandparents' farm, it would get very quiet. The cicadas and crickets and the night noises would stop. There would sometimes be a very bright light coming through one of the windows. And sometimes a very low hum that would just go from low to lower. It's hard to describe because it's such a low frequency. It almost had a pounding vibration to it. I would typically see at least 2, sometimes more entities in the room. Generally, they would be what people refer to as a typical gray alien. Short, about 3 feet tall, bulbous heads, very black screen looking eyes, very scary, terrifying for a little kid. I used to look for ways to hide before bed every night. I would, think I could find an ingenious way to hide where they wouldn't find me. I'll get in a suitcase, zip it up, get it under the bed. They'll definitely not find me in there, things like that. But at that point, once I realized, they were there, or they realized I woke up and realized they were there, I would be put into a state of paralysis, like a sleep paralysis, but I was awake. I was awake before it started. And not always, but most of the time. And I couldn't, speak or scream or anything like that. If there was someone else in the room, they would be just knocked out, put into just a state of deep sleep where I could not wake them up. Like on occasion, I've tried to wake up my husband and just, there's nothing. I cannot rouse him at all. And he wakes up at the littlest thing. From that point, they would levitate me off the bed and up through a ceiling or through a closed window. And I know that makes no sense, but when I would approach the ceiling or the window, I'd see every little detail, like details in the wallpaper. My grandma's ceiling had wallpaper and the little edges were curled and brown, or the bugs in the light fixture up there, or every little square in the screen, just crazy things that stick in my head. And as I approached it, my body would get this feeling like a vibration, but it wasn't. And I felt like I was just going into a million bazillion pieces. It's really hard to describe, but other abductees I've spoken to understand what I'm saying. So if someone out there listening has been taken, they'll totally understand that, possibly. And then at that point, almost most times I would just be switched off into a sleep state and wake up either on a transport vessel or sometimes I'd wake up on an exam table. And sometimes I'd wake up in a room with other children. Sometimes I'd wake up walking into this massive vacuous room where I would meet up with the person who was always with me. In the book, I describe him as my handler, and I describe him in great detail, or much more detail in the book. So that's at the end of whatever was happening, because it was different every time. But sometimes it would just be medical procedures, like doing tests. And I didn't know what those tests were. No one ever stops to say, hey, now we're going to do this. That's what this machine is for. No, they're not kind like that. It's very invasive and uncomfortable. And I was generally restrained. After it was over, I would wake up in my bed or in another room in the house, on the floor in another room, sometimes on the couch. Sometimes my pajamas would be in another room. Sometimes they'd be on inside out. Sometimes they'd be down at the foot of the bed. My parents thought I was just getting up and sleepwalking, but I wasn't. I was ending up wherever they put me back, which wasn't always where I was supposed to be. I have friends who would end up coming back and be left in the lawn. Thank goodness that I don't remember that ever happening. But so that would usually be how it would end. Often when they would show up, I was awake when they would show up, because I got to the point that I wake up immediately because I just kept thinking I could get away. I would wet the bed when I was little because it was so scary, and that's not something you do when it's a psychotic break or something. You know what I mean? These are real things. I come back with burns on my body or marks on my body or, different things. So there are physical things that happen alongside it. There are people out there who say it's psychotic delusion. This never happened. It's a dream. Dreams don't come with physical ramifications. And I had so many physical, and I list out in the book just tons of things that happened throughout my life like that. So that is a typical scenario that I would go through most times when it was happening.
And thanks for being willing to share these things. And can you talk a little bit about you mentioned the grays, and for the small gray guys with big heads and big dark eyes, and most people are at least familiar with that concept or that image. Can you talk about other entities? I know you had some experience with what some people would call Nordics, or who and what did you see?
Sure.
And maybe that can, because there are people who, part of why I'm asking this, first of all, just to give people reference and context, but secondly, because we sometimes run into people who say, well, the ones who look like this are good and the ones who look like this are not good. And I'm trying to muddy those waters a little bit so that people don't oversimplify it. So anything from reptilians or mantids and any hypotheses you have about what kind of authority structure there is, or what the grays are versus something else, or who's in charge, or who's calling the shots, and anything you have like that, we welcome your obviously very informed firsthand experience and impressions on these things, because there's a lot of people who are constantly trying to classify and draw boxes around this or that, and they sort of stand by those things, and I think that can be dangerous. So I don't, that's sort of a question, but can you just talk about the entities and what you saw and experienced and what your impressions of those entities are?
Sure. Yeah. I'll start by saying, I don't recommend that anyone ever go looking for any of these entities. Don't go calling on aliens. Don't go try to summon UFOs or aliens.
And that's just specifically, that's like the Greer CE5
yes, CE5
kind of protocols.
Right.
Where you get with a group of people and concentrate and try to summon the
Right.
friendly space brothers. You're saying bad idea.
Bad idea, because as we know, anything in the spiritual realm is going to be highly advanced, much stronger and more advanced than we are. And you're not going to know if you're going to come across something that is malevolent or benevolent. You can ask them, but do you think that a malevolent being is going to tell you the truth? No. We know that evil, they're going to lie. They're going to mislead you. It's just like if someone is coming up to rob you or carjack you, they don't walk around with a big sign that says, hey, I'm a carjacker, I'm a robber, as they're walking up to you. No, they come up as someone you can trust. If someone's trying to scam you, they're going to do it in such a way that you didn't see it coming. And, these entities are so intelligent and so far advanced from us. So I do not recommend it, because you don't know what you're going to get, and we are not equipped to deal with them. We are told in our Bible not to do this, specifically for that reason. It's for our own protection. So, and as far as benevolent space brothers go, I think George Adamski penned that in the 1950s in his book. You can't convince me that kidnapping little children, raping men and women, taking babies and fetuses from women, scaring people, taking people against their will, doing medical procedures against someone's will. These are not the acts of a benevolent being. These are the acts of some, you can't convince me of that. If you went and took your next door neighbor's 5-year-old against its will, you would be put in jail. Those aren't kind actions. Those aren't benevolent actions. So there are a lot of people who say, well, these are our ancestral seers and they're just here to help us. If they're here to help us, then they can come and sit down with our leaders, or sit down with us, offer us the cure for cancer, offer us the recipe for world peace, give us everything we need, and do it in a kind and loving way, but not in such a way as to terrify people and bother people and mess with people. That's not none of that makes sense. So
You can't stand by the Me Too movement and
no,
say that, and then on the other hand say that, by the way, they have the best of intentions, so this is okay.
right,
So
right,
thanks for clarifying that there's real
yes, yeah,
danger to this, and it's not something we should be
right.
seeking out. So.
So while I explain them, and I know there's a lot of curiosity about these entities I've encountered, I want to make it very clear. These entities I encountered were not kind to me. They were not loving towards me. They did not help me in any way. It was like being in an abusive relationship where bad things happen and then they'll do something nice or something good to keep stringing you along. I was groomed. I was trafficked, for lack of a better word. I was utilized by these beings, for experimentation and for breeding and for whatever else they wanted to do. I don't even know what they were doing with me half the time, and I was in that there, I was threatened. My life and the lives of my family and friends were threatened if I spoke about it. So, and from a very young age. So while it's fascinating to hear about them, they are not kind, benevolent creatures. And I do think it's good for us to be informed as to who and what they are, what they look like. There are myriads of these entities. I couldn't even describe all of them, but they do seem to fall into some very specific categories.
Real quick before you get into that, and I know I asked the
Mhm.
question, but I don't want to forget this.
Mhm.
Did you experience primarily cruelty for the sake of cruelty, or is it more of just clinical indifference with no real empathy or compassion of any kind? And the reason why I ask is because people who experience, for example, like a shadow being, often say it's almost like it feeds on fear, or somebody who comes across something that's a terrifying cryptid in the woods. They're saying it's like it needs our fear and our horror to even manifest. And I don't know if you agree or disagree. I'm not asking you to, but so there's that end of the spectrum.
Mhm.
And then you have this other end of the spectrum where it's just absolute clinical indifference and almost like a sociopathy, or just an inability to have any level of compassion or feeling. Did you experience the whole spectrum of that, or are these beings primarily indifferent, or are some of them just legitimately cruel for the sake of being cruel? And then feel free to continue into the types of beings and what you saw.
Right. I really did experience kind of a spectrum of those things. Some of these entities are just indifferent. They are robotic in nature. And thank you. Especially the shorter, smaller grays that come, and many people experience these entities when they're being taken. And I have very specific feelings about who and what those entities are, having been in their presence so many times. So the and then of course there are other ones. I'll start with the grays, the smaller, shorter grays that I was in the presence of, and many times, and they would show up in my room quite often. They were like workers. They didn't have they had eyes that looked like screens. Their eyes didn't seem to move. They had very few facial features, if any. Their mouths didn't open. They didn't seem to have any working appendages except for their hands and arms and legs and feet. They didn't have any visible organs like genitalia or anything. Their bodies were thin and brittle and small, and they didn't smell very good either. Some of them are okay. Some of them smelled very bad.
What did it smell
Myself,
like?
like a combination between sulfur, a dead animal, urine, kind of in there, and it just depended which one it smelled more like, depending on which one it was.
That
Some of
sounds
them smelled
lovely.
bad. Yeah,
Yeah.
some of them I could. Yeah, I can always tell when there's one around. If some of them, but some of them didn't smell at all. Maybe they were brand new. I don't know, because I believe these entities to be more of a biological suit. I think they're created. I've seen them stacked, on the floor in these facilities where I was taken to, and I was mostly taken underground. And I can go into that later too, but I don't want to get off on too many tangents. Other people have seen them hanging on like hangers or stacked in drawers. I just saw them like stacked up on a floor against the side of where a wall was. Um, so I believe that these are biological suits, that they're created. We can create skin in a lab. there's no reason they can't do the same thing. I think they're fashioned after the other grays I've seen. There are grays that are taller, bigger. Their eyes move. Their faces actually have mouths that open. They have expression on their face. They look like they could have male or female. They're very different. They're more robust. Some are really tall. Some are kind of medium height. There seems to be as many variations of that as there are of us. Almost, they're very just varied when you see them. When I've seen them on the ships or in the underground facilities. But the little grays, I really think are basically, L.A. Marzulli likes to call them meat suits, and I think he's absolutely right. I think they are created like an avatar suit. They could be inhabited by AI. I think they could be inhabited by another entity. And I think quite often, in my experience, they're inhabited by demonic entities. I know that other people don't agree with me on this. That's fine, but I've been in their presence. These things, it feels like a demon. You feel that evil coming off of them. And they are put in these suits and they're completely restricted. They can't yell obscenities or rape someone or hurt someone because they don't have the body to do it in these gray suits. But they get a body. And what does a demon want more than anything else? A body to inhabit. But the demons are slightly lower than their fallen ancestral, angelic beings who, and your audience is familiar with Nephilim. Am I correct? Yes. So, and we know from the extra canonical books that the demons are the disembodied spirits of the deceased Nephilim. And I believe that that's what's inhabiting these little gray suits some of the time. I think some of the time it could be AI, and in that case, it's a very indifferent being. When it feels like an evil being, I think it's more inhabited by a demonic entity, etc. So that's my feeling on the smaller grays. Let's see. As far as, does anyone have any questions on those before I move on to the other entities I've encountered?
No, not on that. I have some other questions related to some of your experience, but just, that'd be great if you just kind of continue on in this vein. It's really, really interesting information.
Okay, thanks, Brian. There are the taller grays, the ones that are, they're definitely in charge of those smaller grays. You can tell the little grays just don't do anything but follow orders. I have my handler was what he appeared to me as, and I call him my handler because this was an entity who was with me from the time I was little. Always there, let me know where to go, led me to where I was supposed to be in wherever facility I was taken, and became very close to me. I had a very Stockholm Syndrome type relationship with this entity. He appeared as a man as we became closer, and had more of a physical relationship. I wanted to see what he really looked like because I could tell that wasn't his form because he would fuzz in and out kind of sometimes in front of my face. And I'd be like, it almost looked like a hologram in front of him, and his true form was that of a reptilian entity. He was beautiful. He was absolutely beautiful. It wasn't one of these scary lizardy things that I've seen, things. He was really beautiful. I try to describe him in great detail in the book, but his skin was opalescent. It was glowing. It was beautiful. I mean, he was scary, but he was also beautiful. So I've seen the insect type that kind of looked like a praying mantis body. Not up close. They're always off in the distance. They would always be kind of off on the other side of a room watching everybody. They seemed like maybe they were in charge, maybe overseeing things, but I don't know because no one ever sat down and said, this is the boss and this is that. They didn't take the time to give me information like that. They did teach me quite a few things throughout my life. I didn't have to open a book in school, so that was nice. But the other type I saw, especially when I was little, these were around me a lot, I think because they looked more human, were the Nordic, what people call the Nordics. These were taller than normal humans, very thin, fair skin, fair-eyed, fair hair. They had very large eyes, like twice the size of ours. Um, and I'll see people sometimes on TV or in public and get this really strange sense that that is hybrid because of their eyes. I can almost always, I'll get this weird feeling from people. So I don't ever go up to them and ask because it's not something I want to pursue. But
On that note, really quick, do you
mhm,
notice that with Hollywood figures? Sometimes do you see a new up and coming actor or actress and be like, wait a second? Because
yeah.
I do sometimes, and I don't
Oh
have
yeah.
the same
Oh yeah.
background of experience you do, but sometimes I'm like, that something's
Yes.
up. So, okay, I'm
Yes.
glad it's
And
not
not
just
even
me.
some of the, not always just the new ones either. But yes, I'll be like, were her eyes always that big? Because
Hmm.
I never noticed this about her before, but that doesn't sit well with me. And then I can't even watch that person anymore
So,
because I get
and
too
would you,
freaked out.
with what you just said there, is that a suspicion that there's a swapping going on or a stand-in where it's like, okay, this person
Yeah.
was there, but now this is something else pretending to be that person?
Yeah. Yeah. That's just a, that's just a suspicion, a thought, a conjecture on my
Sure.
part. But I see more and more of them. I mean, I'll see a newscaster and I'll be like, whoa. I mean, I'll call my husband, look, that has got to be, and I'm not looking for this stuff. It just hits me like a wall of water when I see them sometimes. And
Mm.
but I just, having been around those Nordic entities, especially when I was little, I couldn't even go around my father's um, side of the family because some of them looked so much like that. Just the similar features. Not they were not hybrids. They were not Nordics. They were just normal people. But they had the fair hair, the fair eyes, the fair skin. They were thin, and I was terrified of them as a small, small child, like 2, 3 years old. They couldn't take me around them. I would scream bloody murder, just because you're that little. You can't make those distinctions. So I'm not experiencing that now. Now I can definitely see distinctions of things that look similar to them. So the funny thing is, I saw them and I've seen them all through my lifetime of abductions, but I didn't see them as much when I was getting older as I did when I was younger, which is funny. Um, I don't know if it was just because they didn't need to have them around me because I wasn't scared anymore of the different types of entities or what, or if they were off doing something else. I don't know, but it's kind of weird that I didn't see them as often later on in my life. Um, but those are the general categories that I saw. Now there's variations on all of those, so and
Do
there
you
are other.
interact with what you believe are just human beings in league with these entities, just regular old people who are just cooperating or bossing or coordinating or whatever in any of those experiences? Because I know that's very eyebrow raising for some people to think that there are
Well,
people out there that are interacting willfully and maybe even on a corporate level with these kinds of
sure.
beings.
When I was taken, I was often taken to these massive underground facilities. I know they were underground because we would get in these elevators that would go down and down and down. And then when I was little, I called them the sideways elevators because they went backwards and forwards. Clearly, it was some kind of a high speed train, but when I was little, any kind of a vehicle made noise. So for me to be on a silent vehicle going like that, I just thought it was another elevator that went side to side. And I would be in these massive underground facilities. There were humans everywhere working with these entities.
And
They were not to
and
talk to me, and
uniform
I
or
was
just
not. Different uniforms. Yes, some of them were in what looked like military fatigues. Some of them were in what looked like lab coats, different kinds of lab coats. Some of them were in like these weird uh, benign smock top and bottom type outfits that were just real, didn't have any markings or anything like that. They were just real plain. Um, and just working in different areas and stuff, but they were not to speak to me and I was not to speak to them. And, there were very specific rules set out for me from the time I was little. And, I was always told that I had to be good or there would be repercussions. I mean, I was a little tiny kid and they got me and they took me out into the backyard and then showed me in front of my face a screen memory. It looked like all of my family being walked out, and they sprayed something on the backs of all their necks and the fronts, and then beheaded them all in front of me and said, if you speak about this, if you don't follow the rules, this is what will happen. To a little kid, they showed me this. I mean, it was outside of what I could handle. They found me when I was 6 years old, huddled up in the corner of a bathroom stall because I just was done. It was my little brain couldn't take it.
I mean, that's a traumatic manipulation
Yeah.
techniques at that point.
Right.
That's like
So
MK Ultra level stuff.
Mm-hmm. So when you talk about, are they being cruel on purpose, or are they being benign in their actions? Both, because that's cruel and unusual. That's horrible to do to a little child. And I don't even know if they fully understand how our minds and our hearts and our spirit works, because we're so different from them. And I think part of the process they're trying to do is they're trying to create these hybrid entities is to duplicate what God has done, and they can't do it. They can't do it. They're not creating entities that have a heart and a soul like we do. You can make them look like us all day long. You can create cookie cutters all day long, but it's not going to have my heart and my soul in it. And I know that because that's what left me when I had my near-death experience. I was still me. I still had my personality. I was still me, just without this body. This body is nothing. You take this away and I'm still me. That was so cool. I knew at that point there that God made me as a very unique, one-of-a-kind individual that he loved so much, and that he was going to hold me until it was safe to go back in, and that I was unique, and that every one of us is unique, and that was just such a revelation for me, that there are just no two of us alike. And it's so special that we keep going, that he's not going to let that go. I mean, not to get off, sorry, on a tangent, but God is so good, and we can have all this trauma in our lives, and then God will just bring us something so beautiful. So
besides your near-death experience,
mm-hmm.
And sorry, I don't mean to jump on top of you there. Besides your near-death experience, did you experience any entities outside of an abduction scenario, or even in an abduction scenario, that you thought were good, where you said, oh, this is something different?
I did. Yeah, I had the most amazing experience. After that surgery from the near-death experience, they were trying to get me through the recovery. In the recovery room is where they wake you up after surgery. Usually it takes 30 to 60 minutes at the most. There's usually one nurse walking around taking care of a bunch of patients. All you're doing is coming out of anesthesia, getting your ice chips, feeling better, going to your room. I woke up in that room with like 6 doctors standing around and nurses standing around me, screaming bloody murder. I was in so much pain. They could not get me out of anesthesia without me going into, cardiac arrest or in a stroke or something like that. They worked on me for 4.5 hours trying to get me out of anesthesia to a point where I would be safe to go back into ICU, which is where I went after that. Finally, at about, I think the 4-hour mark, I woke up. They brought me out of the anesthesia again. They kept bringing me out, and I'm just screaming. I can't even describe how much pain I was in, and I can take a lot of pain, and I have a very high threshold for pain. And I remember in my head thinking, "Dear God, please help me. Why did you send me back to this? Either take me back or help me through this. I don't know what to do. Am I supposed to be here?" And all of a sudden, I just felt peace. And I looked up, and there's these 2 beautiful young men, orderlies, at the foot of my gurney bed that I'm on. And they're just dressed in scrubs. And I looked at them. They're about the age of my kids. My oldest, who's about just almost 30 at that point. And I'm like, "Oh, you look like you could be my kids. Oh, thank you. What do you?" And they just calmed me down. They helped me through. All of a sudden, I was okay with the pain. I was okay with everything. The doctors are like, "Oh, wow. Okay. Everything's okay." And I'm talking to them and just, just they were just so lovely and loving and kind to me. And so they're with me. We finally leave the recovery room. We go in, down the hall into the elevator, up to ICU, go down the hall. We get to the room, and my husband and my daughter-in-law are there waiting for me. They were always with me every time I had something like this done. And I grab their hands. I'm like, you have to meet the boys. They remind me so much of my boys. And I not only have my kids, I probably adopt every kid that walks by the house. You know what I mean? If you need a mom, I'll be your mom kind of mom. So I'm like, you have to meet the boys. Oh my God, I love them. They're so sweet. They remind me of our boys. And they're like, oh, okay, where are they? And they're right here at the foot of the bed, and there's nobody there. And I look at the nurse and the other orderly, and I'm like, where are the boys? They're like, ma'am, what boys? The boys that were with us all the way up to the room. They were right here. And she's like, honey, it's just been us. I'm like, no, I was talking to them all the way up to the room. She's like, oh, we wondered who you were talking to. I mean, nobody else saw them. Nobody knew who they were or where they went. But I saw them. They were real. I mean, they had their hands on my leg, on my calf. They were with me. They were talking to me. They calmed me down. They were lovely. And then they were gone. But so the difference there is, here's two entities. They had to have been angelic entities. I mean, that's the only excuse. There's the only explanation, because no one else saw them. And they were nowhere in that hospital.
There's no really sneaky, friendly guys breaking into hospitals.
No, yeah. Especially, they were just, nope. And then I realized, I was thinking about it, they didn't have any badges on. Everyone in the hospital has identification. Even me, as the patient, I had identification. And, and you think about that, they didn't interfere with me. All they did was help me. They made me feel better. They gave me peace, calm, and love. And when their job was done, they were gone. They didn't ask for anything. They didn't take anything. That is the exact opposite of everything else that happened to me with all these other entities in my life. So now I had a really beautiful basis for comparison also. So many things happened that day that helped me to get on this path. Whether it was really renewing my faith, whether it was realizing how amazing God is, whether it was realizing the difference between a benevolent and a malevolent entity, all these different things, whether it was getting the PTSD therapy finally, God knows what we need when we need it, and it happens as he needs it. That woman who gave me that shot, God could have sent her to do that. Who knows? I don't know. Or if that was maliciously intended, that God said, fine, I'll use that for good. Whatever it was, so much good came out of that one terrible experience. I did have a stroke because of it. I used a walker and a cane for a good year. I had to learn to use the whole right side of my body again. You can still see it doesn't work the same as the other side. But, so it was an incredible experience. I wouldn't trade it for the world, so one for God, none for Satan.
Right. So I have a question related to, like we've been over The Threat by David Jacobs. His is a very detailed yet hopeless kind of an account. Like at the end of it, his conclusion is, these guys are here. They're doing stuff. We can't stop them. There's nothing we can do. And there's these different sub-communities inside of this area of abduction research, abduction accounts. And so some people think it's great. Some people have had experiences like yours, but very, very few people that you hear, this is where you're unique, or fairly unique, I would say, is that you also are a Christian. And I want to know what your reception has been like in the church, because, I've found with a lot of these topics, a lot of people in the church are almost secular skeptics when it comes to anything supernatural, except for the resurrection of Christ. They're like, oh, I believe in that. But if you bring up anything else, and you talk about Nephilim, Genesis chapter 6, you talk about non-human entities that are affecting the world around us, and those types of things, or the idea that, oh, the Watchers were imprisoned, but a bunch of these other entities were not imprisoned, and they're still floating around, and this is what demons actually are, and they're still around. And Jesus, in the accounts in the Gospels, he's like, they know that there's an appointed time coming, and all of these different things. But people in the church today typically don't really act or present as if they believe any of it.
Right.
It's just, oh, that's weird. That's like Joel likes to use the term woo woo. It's all woo woo, and we don't want to talk about woo. So you obviously have to deal with the standard skeptic that believes that everyone who has an abduction experience or talks about an abduction experience is a little bit wacky or crazy or what have you. And I just want to say, you don't come off at all as unhinged or a crazy person. Very, very matter of fact. So what was your experience? How has it been with the church? Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? Or do you just kind of have to ignore certain parts of your life, I guess, as a Christian? So anyway.
Yeah, that's a great question. And this has really, been part of the challenge from the beginning. God led me to this. I begin and end this book with a prayer of salvation because that is where my heart is. And I really just want to help people first and foremost. But I'm in a situation where for a lot of people, I'm too Christian to be interviewed by them or to be on their show or their podcast. And I don't push this in anyone's face, don't get me wrong, but I always have it and I always offer it and I always share. And then when it comes to the church, this is way too woo for the church and for a lot of Christians and a lot of Christian podcasts. They don't want to touch it. And what's really scary to me is that I think more people in the secular world know the word Nephilim than people in the Christian world. And that's scaring me because we know that Satan knows the Bible better than most Christians ever will. And that's catching up in mainstream society now. What happens when that catches up fully and we can't defend ourselves because they're coming at us using our own belief systems against us because they know it better than we do? We're going to be in trouble. And I feel that catch in the middle because that's where I sit. I sit really in between these two worlds, trying to create a space like you all have done, like Ellie Marzulli has done. There are more and more. I am seeing this space where Christians are realizing that the Bible is the guidebook to the supernatural, that there are amazing things in the Word, that God is more than just a couple of words on a page, that he's real and that there are miracles now and there were miracles then and there will be more miracles in the future, that his love is the greatest miracle we'll ever have. I'm seeing this space open up and I think that that's wonderful and amazing, and I pray every day that it continues to do so. People like you guys are opening up this space, and that's so important, and your listeners are opening up this space. And if they keep sharing, and then the people they share with keep sharing, this space will continue to open. It really needs to be there because we're at a point in time where our government is now admitting, yes, we have the crash craft. Yes, we have the biologics. Yes, people are being taken. Yes, people are being damaged. People are being killed. Animals are being taken. Animals are being killed. People are they're admitting to all of this. I have reports in here in my book that show that the government is admitted to everything from the missing pregnancies to the random burns to the dozens of surgeries I've had to have that no one can explain and the problems I've had. But the thing is, this is coming now into our day-to-day. It's no longer the stuff of conspiracy theory and backroom conversations and quiet whispers, and you can't tell anyone you've been abducted because you're going to be considered crazy. It is starting to become something that people know about. And why? Because it's, I really think it's going to become something that people are going to see more and more. If these entities decide to show up and say that these are our benevolent seeders, our ancestral, seeders, that they're here to help us, and people agree to go with them, people essentially be making a deal with the devil. They'll be agreeing to follow a fallen entity who is trying to lead people astray. This is my fear. And I think a lot of people share that fear that, if we, I don't know where everyone sits on the rapture and that type of thing, but if, say, all the Christians are taken in the rapture, it'll be very easy for them to say, well, they were all taken by our UFO brothers and sisters, and they've gone for enlightenment training or what have you, and I know that's a common thought among a lot of people in this community, and it's an extremely accessible possibility at this point.
Just as a little side note, you've used the term ancestral seeders a couple times, and I just wanted to throw that out there for people listening if they haven't heard that term before. It's basically the idea that these aliens that have evolved in the material world, and they are coming to visit us, and they actually help seed life on the planet. And
Right.
they put DNA into the system and maybe shepherded it along. And that's the reason that we're here in the way that we are, is because these benevolent alien superpowers came, millions of years ago and seeded this world with life. Because, even the other side of the coin has to admit that evolution doesn't work very well.
Right.
So there's got to be some, it's kind of the non-Christian version of theistic evolution. This is the alien evolution theory. I just wanted to make sure people understood that term, ancestral seeder.
Right.
Well,
And that's
and
kind
it's
of
such
also.
it's
I'm
such a
sorry.
double standard, because it's kind of like, well, this is how they used Darwinian evolution and helped it along with this panspermia process, and so we were right all along, but also
Yeah.
these guys.
Right. That's what I was gonna say. Panspermia is, and I take the time to in the book to give some definitions, and that's one of them, because I don't want to bringing that, saying ancestral seizures and panspermia. I want people to understand what I'm talking about in the book. So I do define a lot of those things in the intro of the book, just so that I'm not, throwing out terms that people aren't familiar with. Panspermia is one. Exogenesis is another that I talk about in the book too. But as far as panspermia goes, and then as far as ancestral seeders, panspermia, where do we come from? Who are our creators? If they do come down and say, and we're going to help improve you, give you, human 2.0, you're going to live forever. Everyone's trying to work on this. I want to live forever. I want to look young forever. I am happy to age gracefully. I'm a grandma. I'm excited about being a grandma. I love being a grandma. I want to look like an old grandma. And so, I'm fine with that. But, I have my, that's where I am in my life, but I don't want to live forever. And the Bible tells us there's going to come a time where people will long for death and it will flee from them. Well, that sounds a lot to me like this, human 2.0, where you can live forever and all this stuff. There's just so many things happening today that we see in the Bible that are warning us, and things that, like the days of Noah, be like the days of Noah, when people were just doing evil all the time. Look at what's happening in our society. I'm not trying to get on my soapbox here, but we really need to be aware and awake to what's happening around us. And that's another thing I hope to do with this book, is to tell people, hey, this is really happening. Wake up. Look at what's happening around us before it's too late.
This is a place to get on your soapbox in terms of, I would love for you to take some time and have this space to say, and it's okay if you don't have it fully baked, but what do you think is going on in terms of the times we're in, what's happening, where we are vis-a-vis scriptural prophecy, but even more specifically, as I've absorbed a lot of different abduction accounts, there seems to be a common belief that something's coming, that is building to something, that there's a preparation for something, because we haven't even talked yet about what are they doing. And so if you want to discuss that, but I want to make sure before we end the recording today, and we still have some time, if you do, we do. I want you to get on the soapbox and say, here's what I think is going on, and here's why I think that, and if you're wrong, fine. But we want people to hear loud and clear what your suspicions are, what you suspect, and where we might be, because part of the purpose of this podcast is to raise awareness, create some urgency, and and get people to sit up and take note and start paying closer attention, because we think that that's part of what Jesus calls us to, is this spiritual awareness. And a reason for that is, if something is happening, then we need to be prepared. And to be prepared spiritually is the most important, starting with salvation, of course, starting with understanding good and evil, and what Christ has done for us. And we'll give you some space for that as well. But so that people understand there's something to be prepared for, and that is biblical. Karin, what do you think is going on? And do you have the sense that your abduction scenario and timing is building to something? And if so, what do you suspect, or what do you think it might look like? And I think you've been hinting at it, but spell it out as much as you want to.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, I really do have the sense that we are building up to a crescendo here of some things happening. There are a couple facets to it. One, I was part of a breeding program by these entities. They were taking my eggs. They were harvesting these fetuses at about 3-month period. I write quite a bit about that. I have documented proof of missing pregnancies. I would go into the hospital. I'm still testing positive. They do a D&C. There is nothing in my uterus. Clean. No fetal tissue. Nothing. Not any clue that I had even been pregnant, but I'm still testing positive. How does that work, right?
And from what I remember from your material, that there had been clear proof that there had been.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it was there, and then it wasn't there.
And then it wasn't there. And I've met so many women who've had the same thing happen. And no one can tell us where our babies went. We don't get to mourn those babies. We don't get to bury them. We don't get to know what they were. It's very emotional. And I'm not going to talk about it too much because I don't want to start crying on you guys. But it's so emotional to go through that, because you love that baby from the minute it's conceived. And that's why I love the work Vicki Joy Anderson and those guys are doing with the No More Dead Babies campaign, because you love that baby from the moment it's conceived. It's alive. It's a human. But these obviously were not human babies. I didn't know that at the time. I loved it no matter what. I believe that, going back to Dr. David Jacobs in the book Walking Among Us and everything that he was saying, yeah, I believe that there is a hybrid program going on. The late Dr. Chuck Missler used to say, Satan's outnumbered 2-1. He's building an army. I believe that. He needs more bodies on his side. Satan does. And if there are hybrids walking among us that are as human looking as you and I, these entities are going to be able to lead people astray, lead people away from the truth. And every one of those people that gets led astray, that's one more person in Satan's army. And that's a tragedy. That's a tragedy when that's someone who's not going to have eternal life. So I believe that's part of it. I believe I'm seeing so much of this movement that these are benevolent space brothers, and I've been talking about ancestral cedars, this kind of ancient alien theory type thing and everyone loves that. Everyone wants to get on board with that. Everyone wants this to be, everyone's looking for some celestial answers to the lifelong problems of the world and the things that they're going through. And, we have the answers, and God has those answers for you, and we have the Bible, but people don't want that. They want the magic, sparkly, fun Disneyland version, and that's what they're getting with the, some of these alien shows. And they want these things to come down and give them a new body and a new life and a new mind and everything else, take over and beat. They want, it's just like having your coffee delivered to your doorstep in the morning instead of making it yourself or putting in the time and the effort. It's having everything done for you and taking advantage of that kind of, thing that people want. So I think that we're on the cusp of having a great delusion, what the Bible calls there will be a strong delusion, where even the most elect will be deceived. I really truly believe that this is a part of that great deception, that and people are buying this hook, line, and sinker. they're buying all this. They want all the woo, and they want to do ayahuasca and go into these trances and meet these beings and get all their answers. And it's scary. It's scary how well received this is being, how this has been. And the fact that it's now mainstream, I'm sorry.
Do you suspect, based on the human cooperation you saw, do you think that there are powers that be that are actively ushering this in and designing this society and shaping this great deception, and that we're being prepped for it, even by as you talked about some of the sparkly ideas, whether it's Marvel or more than people concepts, or benevolent space brothers, or ancestral beings concepts?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that we're being set up to buy this hook, line, and sinker, and to welcome it with open arms? And then those, I have my tinfoil hat always at hand, and sometimes I suspect that there is an intentional destruction of the status quo, where the powers that be are kind of bringing about a great failure, so that there's a good opportunity to bring the phrase "great reset" is overused, but maybe it's apropos here, and that deception is going to be part of that. Am I going too far with that, or do you think that that's reasonable based on what you've seen?
No, I think you're describing like a Hegelian dialect, which has been their pattern all along. You create a problem, and that creates opportunity for a resolution, and then they provide the resolution, which is what they want the resolution to be. So they're creating this cycle of, we'll create a problem so that you will ask us to take over and provide you with this solution, and then we provide you this resolution, which now gives us control over this and creates this direction for everyone to go and puts everyone in this mindset. And you've got that and predictive programming and all these things that we know have been going on for so long.
Well, in the true spirit of Hegelian dialect, that swing is always more extreme.
Yes, exactly. When I saw people working too, and I want to back up and say this because I made myself a little note, I don't want to forget. When there were people working with them, I don't think most of these people that were working, I think that there are powers that be, the higher ups, whoever they are. I don't know if they're government, if they're offshoots of our government, if they're just those who are actually leaders and oligarchs and those in control and power, who probably aren't our figureheads, and we have government leaders, I think, who are just stand-ins and make us think that that's somebody in control.
Talking more the deep state, the real control behind that, the ones who are telling people like our president what to do.
Exactly. So there are, yes, I believe those people are definitely a part of this program, and made all the way back to the Eisenhower agreements and those types of things, made these agreements, because as we know, in this realm, it is a very agreement-centric thing. Someone has to say, you can take people, you can take animals, you can do experiments on them in exchange for technology. Gee, where have we heard that before? Oh yeah, in the Bible, in the Old Testament, didn't we? Yeah. This is not something new. This has happened over and over and over again. It's the same scenario. Man wants to be more like God. Fallen entities come in and say, okay, here, I'll help you do that. Man falls further. But we are sinful. That's just how it goes. But anyway, the people that were just workers that were working there that I saw, and I wasn't allowed to talk to them, and they weren't supposed to talk to me, I don't think they realized what they were getting into. And I've said this before. I think, think about it. If you're in a program, maybe you're just in the Army, or maybe you're working for a government program, maybe you're working for some kind of aerodynamics company, and they're like, you are so smart, we're going to give you special clearance and we're going to put you on some special projects. And you're like, great, gonna get a raise, great. You're going to have to sign all these NDAs, great. Can't tell your family. I have a son-in-law who does that kind of thing. Great. And he can't tell us what he does. That's fine. I know he's not doing this. I'll tell you that. But he knows better. But anyway, it's, and then by the time they're in it, they didn't realize that's what they were getting into. Right. And then I was a part of a program, and other humans were used this way as well. They would use us and abuse us in front of these people and say, you don't want this to happen to your family. You don't want this to happen to your friends, your girlfriends, your daughters, your sons, your family. And that's another way that they kept people quiet. No one in those programs is going to talk. I wouldn't, not to protect my child. I would do anything to protect my children. I think you all would probably agree to that too. Now, I would also try to save everyone I saw there because that's just my nature. But I understand why these people didn't talk. I understand why they didn't help me. I get it. As a parent, I really get it. So I don't think that they wanted to be there, or they wouldn't have used us to threaten them. That made that very clear to me. So there are humans working that don't want to work with these guys, and they know how evil they are. If some of these people would come forward, I think it would go a long way towards, and I think some of these are the whistleblowers. You look at people like David Grush, and he's like, I had to say something. You look at people like the newscaster, I can't think of his name, who left Fox News.
Tucker Carlson.
Tucker Carlson, thank you. My mind went blank. When he says, I can't even share with my wife the stuff I know now or stuff I've heard. Well, that's probably the same kind of stuff I've written in my book. And there are places in the book where I do warn the reader, if you're not comfortable with this type of thing, go ahead and skip this part. And I don't want to trigger anyone, and I don't go into great detail, and I don't do a lot of gory detail in here, because this book isn't supposed to scare someone or trigger someone or hurt, or make someone have nightmares. Like, some people are afraid to read it. Don't be afraid. There's a lot of comfort in here. I didn't want this to be something, but I want it to be something that just brings to the forefront that this is really happening. There's humans working alongside these fallen angelic entities. That is my opinion. I think angelic is kind of a misnomer, but they are, these are entities created by God. We know Satan fell and took a third of them with him, right? So where did they go? They're here. They've always been here. They're not from Zeta Reticuli. They're not from some planet. Who says they are? Where does that come from? That's just something.
And I love that. I want to draw that out, by the way, that
okay.
It's frustrating, and I think telling that there is just an obvious, there's just this expectation that everybody accepts the idea that these entities are just coming from far away. And you can see it on every secular forum and every secular discussion is, well, either they have faster than light technology or they found some way around it, because that's how they're getting here from these distant planets. And I love what you're saying. Who said they're coming from distant planets? Yeah. And we've brought up, and this is a little bit woo, but we've brought up there are places in Scripture where Yahweh tells his people in Deuteronomy chapter 4, for example, he says, hey, don't look too closely at the sun or the moon, or you're going to start worshiping it. That's one example. And it's not because they're a bunch of idiots that worship, rocks in the sky. There's a lot to be, there are a lot of reasons. I've got a couple of books on my shelf back here about, hey, something's going on. And if you saw the recent movie Moonfall, and if you believe that Hollywood's trying to prep us for anything, they're basically saying, also all the way back to Space Odyssey and some of these others, something's going on. There are other entities involved here. Yep. And setting aside the sun and the moon, there's also the whole discussion of, the Bible says all the time, heavens and earth and under the earth. And we've talked about doing a Hollow Earth episode. We haven't done it yet, but you're talking at minimum about deep underground facilities, which is a version or maybe a surface version of Hollow Earth. So what you're saying is this phenomena is coming from somewhere, and there's no reason it has to be coming from a distant star or a distant planet. That doesn't mean there might not be anything going on distant stars or distant planets, but that's not really the main point.
It's not that they couldn't be on those stars or planets. They could be on any or all of them. They could have them scattered all over the place. It doesn't mean that that's their point of origin. If you look at the Mariana Trench, or if you look at this 25,000 foot deep cavern in the Atlantic Ocean, that's like 20 Empire State Buildings or something deep, or something like that. I think about that. When that puts it in perspective, if that's just the oceans, what's under our feet? How deep can we go? We don't know anything about what's under the Earth's surface. Everything is speculation because no one has gone there and done the actual research. So it's all the history books and what you were taught in world geography. Most of that's just speculation. And we don't even know what's on the surface of our own Earth, let alone in our oceans. And I'm telling you, I was not taken off to some different distant planet. I was just taken underground. And when I was in the air, it was just a transport from point A to point B, period. It wasn't some crazy cosmic journey. And I'm not disparaging anyone who says they've had those. It's entirely possible. That just wasn't my case. And none of the other people that I've spoken with in my, that I've met recently have had that experiences either. So, but I'm not saying that doesn't happen. I'm just saying it didn't happen to me or any of my friends. So,
when you were transported,
Mm-hmm.
sorry, when you were transported, to the best of your memory, were you transported on craft that people would classically call UAP or UFO, or do you remember clearly or not remember? Is that what you think the UAPs and UFOs are part of this phenomena?
Definitely. Yeah. I don't, like I said to LA, I don't have any shit memories of anything like landing in the backyard or coming down in the backyard. My memories are being in them. So I have like these, I've seen many UFOs and UAPs. I've seen them so many times. It's triangle ones, round ones, the ones with the big ones and all the little ones around it and things like that. I see them all the time. I swear sometimes I think they just follow me around, but, yeah, these craft are living. They're like a living being. The crazy thing about them is they move, they change, they morph. They're almost as if they're made of biological material, almost like it's surrounding some sort of like there's an exoskeleton around it. So when the crashes, the material that is left over seems almost like an exoskeleton. And it's just modes of transportation. It's all through the Bible. You see these types of craft all through the word and all through history, and not just our history, but the histories of almost every civilization on earth has records of these kinds of craft being used all through time. So all through history. And, even on cave walls and things, you see these things. So, but yeah, they're just a vehicle of transportation, but I do think they can go through different, in and out of different, like, realms and things like that, because, when you talk about astral, different planes and the astral and things like that, yes. I mean, when I have I take this back to the near-death experience. Time did not exist for me there the way it does here. Space did not exist for me there the way it does here. I could still see and hear and feel and think and experience everything, but I didn't have a physical body to do it with, and I had no sense of time whatsoever. So we put everything in this little tiny box, and we think everything has to fit the way it does here for us in our day-to-day lives. We're such a small piece of God's creation, and we can't it doesn't fit into our understanding of time and space and light and sight and everything. This is a very small piece of it. And if we try to fit these entities and how they travel and where they live and what they do and where they go into our little space, we'll never get answers because they don't fit here.
Thank you for that. And I want to ask kind of an odd question here that I think you'll have something to say about. What can we, as Christians, what do we need to be paying attention to in terms of our, for lack of a better term, our consciousness? And the reason why I'm asking that is because as I read Paul, for example, Paul seems to know some things in terms of the things that we're calling astral or non-human. I mean, he's very mystic in the way, it's like he's urging us to wake up to a mystic reality. Mm-hmm. And he gets down to, you need to be really careful what goes into your head. For example, you need to be careful what comes out of your mouth, for example. And I'd love to give you the space to say, since you've had experience across these spectrums, and it sounds like you recognize that there's more than meets the eye, and sometimes what doesn't meet the eye in terms of what we perceive is actually more important. What do we need to be paying attention to in terms of our consciousness, or if you'd prefer to call it our soul? I'm trying to use some popular terms, and you can change them or define them however you think.
No, that's really good. I spent a little bit of time in the quote unquote New Age movement and trying to be more enlightened and live in the moment and be aware and conscious of everything, and then I realized that everything was leading towards them saying, now you're a co-creator or you're a creator, and trying to put you on this even level with God. I'm like, wait, no. I have a creator. I'm not a co-creator. And that's when another light bulb moment for me was like, oh, heck no, I don't want anything to do with that.
So just to clarify, what you're saying is New Ageism is not compatible with Christianity.
Very much so not. Yes, exactly.
Just making that
Right.
clear.
Yes, because we're not the creator. God is the creator. We are his creation. But, if someone tries to say, well, oh yeah, I can create something out of clay but that's God's gift to me to be able to do that. I just give the glory to everything to God, period. So, and I won't go down that rabbit hole because that is a very deep rabbit hole to go down right now. But where I think the consciousness part of it that comes into all this is that people need to be careful of is, we're dealing with a world where suddenly everyone is very aware, of being conscious of other realms, whether it's, even it used to just be very specific select groups understood that. If you weren't with a guru, you didn't know what that was. But now almost everybody knows those words. Mainstream books and media and commercials and things, everything kind of hovers around that. And we have to be very careful what we allow in, yes, and what we say out, because these entities are so much stronger, smarter, far advanced to us. And while there is a lot of truth to all of these things, we aren't equipped to deal in those realms, which is why God tells us not to do it, which I think is what Paul was trying to say. It does exist. These things are true, but they are not meant for us. But we are still affected by them, and we still affect them, and we still have to be aware and be careful. If that makes sense. I hope that made sense. I'm not sure if it did, the way I said that.
No, it's super helpful, and the reason why is because I think you're 100% right that people are very rapidly becoming that we're aware that we're aware. Mm-hmm. And I think most people, even listening to this podcast, have had some sort of waking up journey. And I think it's important because we are told by Scripture to be aware. We're told to be awake and paying attention.
Right.
But that's not the same thing as now go crazy and explore the space and get out there and really see what you can find, because there's a lot of ugly things out there that can and will be found. So our will, our permissions. I've said on this podcast before, and I think even from pulpits, that I'm coming to believe that every willful act is every willful act is an act of spiritual war, and that the choices we make and the decisions we make are so important. And these, when you start getting into these where the demonic realms overlap with these non-human, very physical realms, and may even be completely undifferentiated at some points, then we're talking about realities that matter. And so the things we watch, the things we do, the thoughts upon which we meditate, there's a reason why Scripture says what it says. And it's not because we're all supposed to be Pollyannas. It's because we're in a war, and the behavior and the way we internalize and behave and speak and concentrate all have an effect on what's going on with that war. And so that's why I wanted to ask that, to say, look, what you're describing is not completely separate from that. The New Age stuff is there's a reality to it. It's just not a Christian reality, but exactly. it's very appealing to people, even well-meaning people, mm-hmm. because it seems to be getting into this love and light spiritual space of, I can take some responsibility for how I affect the spiritual space around me. And on one hand, we should, and we are even instructed to scripturally. But on the other hand, you can also be quietly tempted into, and you can be like God. And
right.
That's the oldest lie in the book.
Exactly. That's the thing, is it's all beautiful and love and light. There's nothing wrong with love and light. I'm on a lot of New Age type shows, and I I come in with the love and compassion that Christ has asked us to come into people with, and I stay with that. And I don't, and we don't have too many problems, because if they get off their love and light path, then it kind of throws everything out the window for them. So it becomes very easy to go on some of those shows as a Christian and to share the gospel, because the gospel is love, and so it falls in line. But but then you go from love and light to, and you can have whatever you want, and then you start to go down this road of wanting more and more and more, and greed and creating, and I'm responsible for my actions and the things I do, but I'm not, responsible for creating and bringing wealth and all these other things into my life. That's not what I'm here for. That's not why I'm doing this. You don't make money writing a book. Trust me, I know. You do it because God tells you to do it, and you do it because it's a ministry, and that's why you do it. But yeah, I think that we are in a kind of there is a section of population who want more and more, and that movement appeals to that, because it's like, you can have whatever you want, you just have to manifest it. Manifest, what does that sound like? What do evil spirits do? Oh yeah, they manifest. Think about the words they're using. This is where Vicki Joy Anderson's book and my book work together really well, and you'll probably start seeing us do some things together, because this is where people need to understand that this phenomenon, this abduction phenomenon, the UFOs, and what she talks about, and the dark entities and everything, it's all the same thing. It's all the same thing. It's no different. A demon's a demon. A fallen angelic being's a fallen angelic being. We're all dealing with the same things. You can put whatever name you want on it. It's still a battle. It's a battle in the spiritual realm. It's a battle in the physical realm. It's a battle for our hearts and our minds and our souls. And we need to be awake to that and make sure we're aware. Here's where awake and aware does come in. Be awake to what's going on around us. Be aware of what's happening, and spend time in the Word, in the Bible, because it's a fascinating book, and it's full of fascinating stuff. It really is not some boring old book that should belong sitting on a shelf all day.
Well, that's part of the problem we have with our Western Christianity, is most people's experience, especially if they grew up in the church, is a watered down, infantile version of Christianity, not really understanding the depths of the things that are going on in the scripture, and falling for some of this stuff in terms of, oh, well, I can believe kind of what I want, and I can pick and choose different parts of the Bible. And, it's these hard questions related to societal norms and all that kind of stuff. People, they're not prepared to kind of say, well, this is what the Bible actually says, and this is what you can stand on and what you can't stand on. And that's part of the ministry that we're trying to do here, is educate people.
That's awesome.
Read your Bibles, read this stuff, understand what's in there and what's not in there. And, it's one of those frustrating things. It's like one of the greatest advantages the enemy has over us in the West right now, is that it's kind of turned Christianity into a milquetoast situation. And I'm not talking about, being super dogmatic or whatever, and just saying, you got to believe exactly what I believe or you're wrong. Not at all. But at the same time, what does the scripture say, and what does it not say? And like you said earlier, it's like, the Bible doesn't say that there's no entities God created that are on other planets. So how could you be dogmatic about that and say there aren't?
Right.
Or how could you be dogmatic about it and say there are? Right. It's like, there's a lot of things like that. It's like the scripture does tell us a lot about spiritual warfare. It does tell us about Nephilim. It does tell us about those types of things. And there's things that it doesn't tell us about. So rather than take the tack of anything that the Bible doesn't say exists, then I'm going to ignore it. Right. That doesn't work. It helps the enemy. It doesn't help us.
Right. And God gave us what we need, but we don't know the history of the angelic beings. We don't know. All we know is what God gave us that we need to know for our salvation. I mean, and if people think that that's it, they're crazy. There's so much more to it, but it doesn't affect our salvation. So God didn't give it to us because we wouldn't be able to manage that much information. As it is, you're hard pressed to find someone who's ever read their Bible. So why would God give us more when we're not even reading what he did give us? I mean, I think it was probably a blessing when Moses went back and got the Pentateuch, and it probably condensed down a whole lot of stuff into just those 5 chapters. Can you imagine what it must have been before that? Before the flood, there was probably a lot more, So, I mean, he's given us a really nice, concise, this is all you need. And I believe that it is the inerrant word of God and that it's all we need. And that there is a lot more that we just don't know, and it's okay. We don't need to know. We've got.
Well, and he
what we
also
need.
gives us more and more as time goes on. We find
Yeah,
more things that we're able to translate and find different archaeological things that they corroborate the scriptures as opposed to
yes,
contradict it. That
and
kind of
like
thing. It's amazing because God's
it
like,
is
okay, well, I waited a few thousand years to let you see this, but go ahead and
exactly.
check it out.
And you're finding now more and more people are having these amazing new revelations when they're reading the word. And you look at Daniel when it says in Daniel 24, it says, seal up the words till the time of the end. And all of a sudden, the book of Daniel makes sense. People are going to and fro across the earth, but back and then, yeah, I can crisscross the earth in, a very short amount of time now, different things it's crazy, so it's
Well, and
exciting. And it's an exciting time to be alive when we're getting so much new stuff out of the word. I'm sorry.
it is, and there's as a very real world, just kind of fun fact example of that. When you were describing seeing your handler in his true form, and that he was reptilian, but
Mm-hmm.
beautiful. One of the recent finds we have in the Dead Sea Scrolls are the testaments of the patriarchs, and one of them is the testament of Amram, and he talks very specifically about seeing 2 beings that were arguing. And when he asked them, and I'm not saying this is the real testament of Amram, I'm just saying it's an ancient document called the Testament of Amram, and you can find it.
I'll look it up.
And he talks about 2 beings that are arguing, and they're these glowing, beautiful, overwhelmingly beautiful beings. And he asks them, what are you arguing about? And they say, well, we're arguing about which one of us you're going to worship. And then he says something really interesting. He says he turned and his face was the face of an adder, and the other one turned and his face was the face of an asp. And they're trying to translate these words, but it's 2 serpent-like beings. But he's describing them as the colors of the rainbow, and these. So in other words, beautiful
That's
reptilians, which is something that is, you don't
uh,
hear that phrase reptilian and beautiful put together
uh-uh.
very often. And so your
No.
specific description of that immediately made me think of this very, very old document.
Oh,
And that's exactly what he described. And then whether or not that gets into the seraphim and all these other things is a
yeah.
whole additional episode. But that's just a fun fact. So I want to make sure that we get a chance for both Brian and Dan just to ask a final question, whether it's and Karin, you've been amazing and wonderful. And I really hope that we'll have you on again. I think there's a lot we can discuss, and we'd love to have you and Vicky on for some of your collaborative
Yeah.
conversations, if you like. I think that this space is a good experimental space. It's a friendly space. We have a nice audience. They have some, they have enough experience and depth in scripture and the kinds of things we bring about that I think there's enough context to experiment with some ideas without freaking anybody out. So
Good.
so please come back. We hope to have you back.
I
But I want to make
will.
sure before we wind up that Dan and Brian get a chance to ask any additional specific questions they had, since you've been so kind to answer just questions that we don't get to ask somebody who's seen these things before. Be like, what did it smell like? I've wondered. I've never been able to ask before. So
Yeah.
let's start with Dan, because he's been very patient and quiet. Dan, please take
Yeah, I
the
was going to
mic.
say it's all Dan now. I've already
Yeah.
asked the questions, and he's basically said nothing the entire podcast.
No,
So
you've been very quiet, Dan.
Just listening.
Yeah.
No, it's amazing to hear from you. One thing that you just mentioned in passing that I think probably piques some interest is you mentioned that they would teach you things.
Hmm.
And then you also, then there's also the conversation of, well, there's the exchange of knowledge in a very negative way. So, maybe touch a little bit on a little more detail on what that is when you said they taught you things, what you mean by that.
Oh, sure. Growing up, they took me so many times, and they would give me these kind of brain dumps of information about mathematics and science and physics. And as a little kid, I understood, you know, I remember, how just how things worked in ways that I shouldn't. I would have when I was little. My father was. I was probably 3 or 4 years old, and they like to tell the story of my father was smoking a cigarette, and I walked up to him and I said, "If you continue to do that, you shall come to no good end." And they're like, "This child can't even speak," and she comes up and says this massive sentence to him, because I was repeating something I'd heard them say to me. You know what I mean? And then, but they would dump this information, and so, when I was in school, they busted me off to the high school for math classes with some other little boy because they didn't know what to do with us. And I remember going to the high school and the teacher going, "You two can stand on your seats and raise your hand if you have any questions." That's how little we were, But I wasn't a genius, but but I already knew all this stuff. And so they didn't, there's a difference between having a super high IQ and being a genius and just already knowing. I just already knew because they kind of dumped all this stuff on me. And I don't know why they did, unless it was to see how we would receive information. I mean, everything seemed to be experimental, but I'm not the only one. And I believe they did it to one of my kids because he also was like me, never had to crack a book and already knew everything. And I didn't realize it was happening to him till he was an adult. And I'm like, "Why didn't you tell me?" But I didn't know at the time how to stop it. So yeah, I think that's what they were doing. I think it was more of experimental and just them trying to, offer information, see how we would receive it, see what we would do with it. I understood a lot about magnets, a lot about physics, just things that, I remember when I first saw, I guess that won't, never mind. I won't go down that path, but yeah, they gave us a lot of information for sure. And it does remind me, yes, of the information exchange a little bit. that
Well,
you're just
it's nice to know that probably for better or worse, there are some really excellent education techniques out there that we
yeah,
respond to really well. That you don't have to be a genius to
yeah,
have a good math education. So,
right,
um,
exactly.
Brian, I want to give you a chance for any final questions, and we'll give a little space for closing thoughts for people.
I mean, in the book, you definitely go into a lot of detail in a lot of different areas. I guess give you a chance to quickly reiterate the the hope in the power of Christ in your life over these things, um, versus that kind of desolation of hope that comes when you consider these things and people allow fear to overcome their mind, which is an easy thing to do, especially when you wake up in the middle of the night and you can't move and you feel evil presence and entities and on and on and on. And all the experiences that you had. I mean, your experience on the table with the woman injecting you with the syringe as a paralytic. I mean, that's straight out of a horror movie.
Yeah, no
You
kidding.
know, it's not something that people can deal with very well. But um, so just that hope and that idea, if you could just share a little bit more on that, and then
Okay.
I'm done.
Okay, sure. Yeah, for myself and for so many other abductees who I've spoken with, we spent our lives being afraid to look out the window at night, making sure I closed the blinds and the curtains because I could not look out that window at night. Just being afraid when they were going to come back, what was going to happen next. And I know now that I don't have to be afraid that they can't come and take me. They can't cross this threshold. It's not for lack of trying. Yes, they have still tried, but they don't have any authority over Jesus, over God. They don't. They there is a hierarchy, and they have the same creator that I have, and I am protected. Jesus already came. He did the hard work. He did the hard work on Calvary so that I don't have to, and that I can be safe, and that I can have a life where it's okay to make mistakes, and it's okay to be afraid, but I know that he's always got my back. And I don't have to worry about these things anymore, because let me tell you, it's a terrifyingly scary life to live with these things. They are just, I'm sorry, so I get teary when I think about this, because the amount of freedom that you get, from that sacrifice that Jesus made for us is amazing. And not just for me, I'm speaking for so many other people that I have talked to, that have been able to break free from this. It's a terrifying place to be. And I feel for anyone who has experienced this in the past or is experiencing it now. And that's why I have a contact me page on my website, where people do reach out to me, and I'll talk to you or email with you or whatever you want to do. If someone wants to reach out, I'll minister to you. I'll share what I know. And the book has a lot of that information in it too, for people who are suffering with this.
Well, Karin, thank you so much for sharing and for talking with us today. And I think based on research I've seen, I think what you've experienced is much more common than people realize. And so there's probably a lot of people out there who have experienced it and have never talked to anybody, or scared to probably question their own sanity and reality. And I mean, it's just mind-blowing stuff. So thank you for being vulnerable, for writing the book, for coming on this podcast and sharing with us. We'll definitely have to have you back on again.
Thank you.
One thing I really appreciate, we always try to bring it back to, we cover some topics that are such a paradigm shift for people that a lot of times that can lead to fear, right? When you realize the way you've been looking at the world is not even close to complete, that can be a scary thing. And so I appreciate that you keep saying, it's not a fearful book. Don't fear, have hope. Mm-hmm. I wrote down a quote you said, like, when you realize that they have the same creator that you have. And that's a really powerful line and concept for people to wrap their minds around. Is like, these are not some entities that are equal to God or competing. I mean, they think they're competing with God, but God is still the creator of them and us. And the final thought I have, and then I'll hand it back to you and Joel. These things come, I mean, I think their ultimate goal is to deceive and to lure people away from Christ, ultimately. And just last night, I opened up the Bible, I was reading Galatians, and, Galatians 1:8 is a verse I think we skip over a lot of times, but in this context, it kind of comes to life in a new way. So, Paul's talking about, I can't believe you people have so quickly fallen away from the gospel. And he says, but even if we or an angel from heaven should preach to you a gospel contrary to the one we preach to you, let him be accursed. And so you think, okay, so if somebody else is preaching a different gospel, but, an angel from heaven coming and preaching a different gospel. And that's exactly what a scenario that we're looking at here is, right? Yeah. It's something coming, saying they're an angel from heaven, preaching a different gospel than the one we have in the Bible. And so just that reminder, like, that's why we need to be so firmly grounded in God's word and the Bible, so that even if something looking like an angel comes down seemingly from heaven, saying something that contradicts the word of God that we have, we've got to take it back to Christ and take it back to what we know is true in the word.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you, Dan, because, these things, if they come down and they make themselves look so beautiful and splendid, and they give themselves giant white wings and giant white robes and hold their arms out and be like, I'm here to share the truth. How many people do you think are going to fall for that? A lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot.
Most.
And doesn't Paul also tell people that they should protect their wives from the angels? Was it Paul who said that?
He talks about he says for the sake of the angels. He talks when he talks
Yes.
about modesty and dress and those sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of those eyebrow raising verses that people often skip over.
Yep. Makes sense.
Karin, I'm going to ask one final question. It's kind of an odd question, but I think you can go wherever you think fits best, and then we'll wrap it up with that. And I'll also give you a chance to share where people can find you. But my final question, just very open ended. But if something pops into your mind or whatever direction you think this makes sense. So you have had the strange and in many cases terrible experience of lifelong abduction by unfriendly non-human entities. What did you learn?
That's a great question. Ultimately, what I have learned is that there is one creator above all, and that he loves us so much that no matter how bad the things of this world, because we live in a fallen, sinful world, no matter how bad those things get, he can always, always give us beauty for ashes, no matter what, no matter how ugly it looks, and no matter how bad it feels in the moment. He loves us so much. He always can turn it around, and he can save us from anything. There is no power greater than God, than his love for us. None.
And not only can he give beauty for ashes, he's promised us he will. And that's the hope to which we aspire and look forward. And I love the verse in Thessalonians that says, when he returns, we'll stand side by side and marvel at him together. And it's based on our conversation today and getting to know you today. It's really fun to anticipate that and know that we'll be marveling together when that happens.
Yes.
So,
yes. Linking
Karin,
arms, and we'll all be standing together, high-fiving each other, going,
that's right.
Oh my gosh, remember Joel, we talked about this?
This is what I was trying to explain.
Exactly. Isn't it so much more than we ever thought in our wildest dreams? Yes,
And I always imagine the Apostle Paul being like, I specifically said that, guys. I spelled it out for you.
Yeah.
So.
But you didn't give us a basis for comparison, Paul.
That's right. Yeah.
So.
Karin, where can our listeners find you? By the way, I will send you our Telegram chat thread. We always encourage it. That's our community. Telegram's just a messaging app. Listeners, we have dozens of people on there, and they're pretty active, and it's a fun community. So if you want to grace us with your presence there, that's probably the easiest way for our community to interact, and we'd love that. So you're absolutely welcome there. So I'll send that to you in a separate follow-up email, and then of course I'll let you know when this podcast episode drops. I'll do the post-production on it and try to get it out pretty quickly in the next few days here. Meanwhile, let our listeners know where they can find you and how to contact you. Obviously, we highly encourage everybody to buy a copy of Stolen Seed, Evil Harvest by Karin. That's Karin Wilkinson. I'm holding my copy here, and I've only been able to go through it briefly, but I really look forward to going through it in more detail. Obviously, Ms. Wilkinson has a lot of wisdom and encouragement to share here. And there are books that we talk about on this podcast that we say, hey, we learned a lot, but we don't recommend you read this book because it's upsetting or heavy, or there's a lot of evil in it. And so, but this is one that we absolutely recommend. And so, listeners will have a link to that in the show notes. Go get a copy. I think this one specifically is through L.A. Marzulli's website, less so than Amazon. And I think Vicki Joy Anderson's book was also through L.A. Marzulli's site. So we'll make sure we link to that. But let people know where they can find you, where they can interact with you, anything you have coming up that you want to put on our radar. If you've got speaking gigs or anything like that we should be aware of, or other podcasts that you want to make sure people are aware of, please use the space here.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much for recommending the book. I'm so glad that you like it. Yes, my book and Vicki Joy Anderson's book are exclusively at lamarzulli.net. That's lamarzulli.net. lamarzulli.net, and then /store, or go to the menu drop down and you'll find both of ours there. You can find me at my website at KarinWilkinsonAuthor.com, and I will give you all these links for the show notes. You can find me at on Facebook and Instagram, just under my name at Karin Wilkinson on Facebook and Karin Wilkinson Author on Instagram. I couldn't get my name on Instagram for some reason. And yes, if you go to L.A. Marzulli's website and follow his conference schedule, I'm usually wherever he is because I'm helping run the book table. I'm signing copies of the book and talking to people. The next place I'll be is January 26th through the 28th of 2024 at the Fellowship in Lubbock, Texas. LA will be doing a 3-day presentation on the coming Great Deception, and I'll be joining him for just a very short time on there, but I will also be there just to talk to people and sign books and meet people. And I love having the chance to fellowship and pray with people and meet people at these events. It is the best part of what I get to do. So I'm so blessed with that. And then I'll be at the next Prophecy Watchers Conference, which is the end of February, beginning of March of 2024, February 29th through March 3rd in Orlando, Florida. That's the next one. So if you can get to either of those, I will be there, and I would love to meet people. I love to talk with people, pray with people, whatever. And obviously we'll have the books there as well. So that's the easiest ways to find me. And if you're in the area where I'm going to be, please come and meet me. I love to meet everybody.
Absolutely. And that same goes for those of us here in the Front Range of Colorado. Let us know if you're coming through as well.
Oh, yeah. When Vicky's up there, I might see if I can come up too. So I'll work on that.
It's ski season right now, and we've been getting snow. So I don't know if that helps get you out this way. And it's not 25 below like it was a few days ago. It's warmed back up again. So.
Yeah, thank goodness. Thank goodness.
Okay. Karin, thank you so much. Dear listeners, thank you for joining us on this episode 26 of the Mystery Bible on podcast. As always, the journey continues, and we are so grateful for this encouraging conversation with some dark, heavy topics, but really the encouragement of Christ and the gospel, as we always try to highlight, so that you know that we take these things seriously. And the reason we're having these conversations is because we think these things are real, and we think that they are clear and present, and we think that if we don't pay attention to them, they are also dangerous. But when we have Christ on our side, and when we are walking in the light and walking with him under his blood and by his salvation, then we have no fear, and we have no reason to be afraid of these entities, because as Jesus says in John, I think it's 16:16, take heart, I have overcome the world. And he also says in 1 John, says, greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. So we have a lot of encouragement and promises from Scripture that our comfort is in Christ. Listeners, if you don't know what I'm talking about when we say that, then please reach out. You can contact us through our Telegram channel, which I've linked in the show notes. And then, Brian, I always get this wrong. I think it's info@mysterybibleon.com, or is it contact@mysterybibleon.com? It's info at mysterybibleon.com. That will come to Dan and Brian and myself.
Dan, we'll go ahead and add a contact.
Yeah, we'll just make them both work.
So we'll just add all the ones that Joel says, and then all of them will come to us.
It's a circus in here, guys. It's and by in here, I'm gesturing at my own head. So reach out to us if you aren't sure, because we would love to help get you pointed the right directions when it comes to making sure that you are under the blood of Christ. And there's no ceremony, there's no robe. It's just a conversation with your Creator. And if you've never done that, it's something that we encourage you to have. We want you to have that conversation and say, hey, it sounds like there's some reality here, and I want to make sure I'm on the right side of this. So we absolutely encourage that. And like Karin suggested, get into your word, into your Bible, get into the Word. For those of you who don't know, all of us have a background in teaching and preaching expositorily through Scripture. I teach actively at the Ascent Church here in Monument, Colorado, and studying at seminary as well to continue to learn and get better and better at those things. And as Karin described, it's such a joy and a delight. The Bible is our handbook to understanding these difficult topics. So thank you, dear listeners, for joining us. Thank you, Karin Wilkinson. We look forward to hearing the warm feedback from people as they interact with you and as they buy their copies of your book and read it, and as this conversation becomes something that is welcome inside of churches as we believe it should. Everybody, thanks for being here, and we look forward to the next episode.